Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again. I hope you're all well and happy. Today we're going to jump back into our basic Bible study, and we're looking at the book of Exodus. We're calling this a Slice of Truth series, and today we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 20. Remember last time the children of Israel had arrived at Mount Sinai, and God had given them instructions about not approaching the mountain, that he was going to make a dramatic appearance, and if you touch that mountain, you're going to have serious consequences, death actually. So let's see what happens as God reveals himself in this event at Mount Sinai. Chapter 20, verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So remember, they'd been in Egypt for 400 years or more, 430, something like that, and God had delivered them. All these people had seen his miracles, the plagues and the destruction of the Egyptian military, the provision of manna, the pillar of fire that went before them during the day and the cloud at night. I mean, they've seen all of these things. Verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. So this appears to be law number one. Of course, God didn't number them. He just listed them. We put numbers to them, but you shall have no other gods before me. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. So no idols, nothing you're going to worship as a god. Verse 5, you shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generation, to those who hate me. It's like a ripple effect. If I sin today, there's a ripple effect. It has consequences years in advance. And likewise, we'll see in verse 6, it goes the other way too. But showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. So you have somebody who loves God, keeps God's commandments. His deeds and actions are also going to ripple ahead for generations to come. And I think that's what God's referring to here. I've heard men, I used to hear several of them at work where I used to work, when an issue would come up and I'd be concerned about it and want to get it resolved, their response would be, oh, in 100 years this won't matter. But in reality, things sometimes that seem trivial will matter. What we do now, again, like I said, has a ripple effect for many years and many generations down the road. So we need to take things seriously in that regard. Verse 7, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. To treat God's name trivially, using it as a curse or in jest, don't use God's name in vain. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And God goes on to explain this a little bit. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you. So this applies to your whole family and any visitors you have. This Sabbath is a day, means set apart. It's a day set apart to not do anything, to not do anything, but to worship God and to do good, to rest. Verse 11, For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, God didn't need to rest. There are verses in the Bible that say God never gets weary or tired. He did this for man so that we would have a day to just rest and contemplate and worship God. Remember that the children of Israel had been in Egypt for, like I said, 430 years, and they had worked nonstop. There's no indication that there was a day off. And the Egyptians too. There was no day of rest. You just worked every day, worked all the time. And so God is trying to make them realize they need to set time apart for Him and to rest and to do good deeds. It's for them, for their benefit. But it's so ingrained in them, from all these years in Egypt, that He actually has to make it a rule. You're not going to work on the Sabbath. Isn't that amazing? Verse 12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. It's so important. God here early on emphasizes the importance of the parents and that they should be honored. The parents, in a sense, are this mediator. They're to teach the children about God, about how to approach God, about worship, about prayer, about what God has revealed and through the prophets and different scriptures. He is placing a big responsibility on these parents, and the children are to honor the parents. Now today that's very difficult because we have broken families, we have divorces rampant, of course, and we've got single parent families. And today, if you tell a teenager to honor their father or mother, they may, get a weird face and say, well, why? They may have been treated poorly or badly. They may never have been told anything about God. Maybe all they know is about, Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and Halloween, stuff like that, but never actually taught anything about God. But back in these days, it was very important, and the children of Israel took this seriously, and generally the parents did do what God expected of them. Maybe not because of a heart relationship with God, but merely because it was written and a part of the law. Verse 13, you shall not murder. That seems pretty simple, but that has been misinterpreted as thou shalt not kill many times. But premeditated murder, not killing by accident, an act of war or something like that, but you shall not murder. Verse 14, you shall not commit adultery. That applies to men and women. We're going to see that women over time have taken the brunt of the punishment for this type of sin, but this applies to men and women. Verse 15, you shall not steal. That's pretty self-evident what that means. Verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You're not going to lie. You're not going to go to court and lie. You're not going to lie about your neighbor to your friends and acquaintances. You're going to tell the truth. Verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. In other words, you're not going to be jealous of what your neighbor has and yearn for it and want it, and possibly even going to the next step and violate the previous laws and steal or take it. Verse 18, and all the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, and when the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. So God didn't have to worry about them getting close to the mountain. The event itself pushed them back. They were afraid. Verse 19, then they said to Moses, speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but let not God speak to us, lest we die. That's how fearful they were. This is such a stressful, awesome event that they just can't handle it. They can't take it. Verse 20, and Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. That's very interesting. You know, when I was a kid, my dad would tell me not to do things or to do things, and I wouldn't understand why. But because he had authority over me and he could spank me, I would obey him, not because I could rationally understand why he was telling me to do these things, but because he was in authority over me and I was afraid to get spanked. It's kind of a similar situation here. As I grew up, I learned to respect my father and knew that he was telling me to do and not do these things for my own good. And so that fear, that being frightened of him, gave way to an awesome respect for him. But it was a growing process. And but God here is trying to make an impression on them so that here early on they will obey him and fear him. And then as time goes by, the plan is they will mature and do these things because they understand, in many cases, why he's doing these things. But even if they don't understand, they will learn that God is doing things for their own benefit, and they will hopefully obey. We'll see that it doesn't work out that way down the road, but it's a great plan. Verse 21. So the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. So they're not reading it like I am and like we are. They actually saw this. Verse 23, you shall not make other gods besides me. Gods of silver or gods of gold you shall not make for yourselves. You shall make an altar of earth for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. A lot of the pagan peoples had elaborate altars, very artistic in nature, awesome in size and scope, that they had carved so that they could worship these idols. And God's saying, no, don't want you to compete with them. Just a simple altar. The important thing is that you worship me. And I don't want you to... Now they're going to keep wandering, you see. And as they wander around, they're not going to have to build an elaborate altar everywhere they go. God is going to give them later, we'll see, plans for a tabernacle, a worship center. But he doesn't want them to use as an excuse, well, we didn't have an altar, or we didn't have this. Well, no, you just make a simple altar and worship me. Verse 25. And if you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. I don't want any fancy tooling. I don't want it to look like a pagan altar. The important thing is our relationship and your worship of me. And I don't want steps on it, so when you walk up, you expose yourself. They generally used slight inclines, ramps. But God is making it very clear that the important thing is their worship, not the things, not the altar. Now, years down the road, God is going to instruct a great temple to be built, and that's a different scenario that we'll talk about later when we get there. Anyway, we're going to stop there today, but notice that God has given them the 10 Commandments, but He hasn't given them any tablets yet. You know, we always hear about the tablets, and you see Moses carrying the tablets. That's going to happen a few chapters from now, but he's verbally given these instructions. We're also going to see in the next chapter that there's a lot more instructions, a lot more rules. So these 10 aren't the only ones, but they're the ones that get all the attention, and they kind of have a universal application, where the ones we're going to read about in the next chapter, at least to me, seem to be more focused on their life right at that time, some of the things that they're involved with, you know, their cattle and how they dealt with each other at that time. But we'll see those other rules later. But what an awesome event. And surely it would achieve the purpose that Moses explained back in verse 20. God is testing you, and He wants you to remember this. He wants it to be such an event that that it's seared in your brain, and you remember it. And because of that, you will obey me and trust me and love me. And we'll see what happens. Anyway, I hope this was meaningful and interesting to you. I hope you'll watch the next one. In the meantime, God bless. Bye-bye.